carpet making. This topic has been dear to me because from the time I started this company, it was kind of sewn into the DNA of it that I really wanted to work with natural materials for a number of reasons. A, I was attracted to the beauty of using natural materials that were hand processed, but I also wanted to not be a part of a problem in terms of where I was producing. I'm producing in another country, and I wanted to leave things as well as we could. So we wanted to make beautiful carpets, but we didn't want to make a mess with the people we were working with. And so I found one of my loves was natural dyes, and one of the difficulties in carpet making, textile production, is what to do with chemical dyes when you've used them. We've come a long way with artificial dyes and their toxicity, which means 20, 30 years ago they were much more detrimental to the environment, and now I'd say they're much less so. But that being said, natural dyes have really no detriments. They're completely organic. And then I'm thinking about from the source where we're making them to the home. So when the carpet is bought by the homeowners in their home, there's also benefits to them from having a completely natural product. And I think even beyond that, it goes into the vibe that's left in the carpet through the whole process. Where were the materials? How were they processed? Who processed them? What were the conditions where they were processed? How were the people that were doing it? And all of that then coming together, being woven with an amazing amount of man hours going into making a single handmade carpet. But then there's a kind of, I'd say, like a psychic energy then left in the product. And so that may not be visible, but for some people you might actually sense it.
Bravo.
So let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing, which is a little different today. We're sourcing all of our raw materials from, as best we can, from the sources. So we don't buy any processed materials. We get everything in the most raw state, so we know what it is. It's very difficult today to know if you're buying, let's say, yarn that purports to be silk or cashmere or mohair or wool, whatever, what the content is. Sometimes you can test it chemically, but it's much better if you can buy the raw material and then you can hand process. And that's increasingly difficult to do today because there's less people that will do that hand work. It's a smaller a group of people that can do it. It's a real skill, and because there are pressures in these countries for people to migrate and work in, let's say, the Middle East, there's a much smaller group of people that can do that kind of work. The dyes we use are all natural dyes for the natural part of our product line. We do make carpets that don't have natural dyes in them as well, because for certain requirements you need to make colors that you cannot make with natural dye. But when we're making carpets for ourselves, we're often making them with natural color. And I think that's kind of like the signature part of our brand. With really great natural color, we don't really, but I feel like some of the most beautiful carpets I've made were just simple color fields where the material was just beautiful and the color was just very opulent and attractive. So the dyes we use all derived from plants. Almost all of them are medicinal. So the colors are connected with the healing properties of those plants. And those plants are used in traditional Eastern medicine, and they're still used today. So when we buy the raw materials for the dyes, we're buying them actually from medicinal dealers. A good example, and I can pass some of these around, or you could look at them after the talk, but like, this is like sandalwood, which is a very precious, beautiful smell. Many of these dyes, when we're dyeing with them, the dye house just smells like perfume. This carpet up here has all natural dye in it, and it's a pretty good example of when you're doing really good dyeing, you can get real jewel tones. I'm making some colors that I don't think are being made by anybody else today. It took us a long time experimenting to rediscover how to make certain colors that you find in 16th, 17th century carpets. And the colors are incredibly fast. These colors over here too, these are all natural colors. That indigo is all natural. So with the dye, we're also using materials that are a little bit different. I really love using this material, which is wild nettle from the Himalayas. This fiber is completely sustainable. If you cut the plant down, it just grows back. Natural color. This is the natural color. If we wash it, we can lighten it, but this is the way it comes after it's hand processed. Mm. It's hand processed up in the middle hills of the Himalayas. Wow. And the fiber's been used probably for at least 10,000 years. It's a very early fiber, like hemp. This has been around a long time. It's, in my opinion, better than hemp because it's softer. It's extremely strong, lasts forever, but the more you wash it, the softer and suppler it becomes. Mm. And let's see, I'll pass a few of these around. We're using stuff like mohair, this would be pashmina, and llama, alpaca.
Do they have alpaca in Nepal?
They do. They actually, some people are farming alpaca right now, raising alpaca. This is a silk that is wild. It's not cultivated. It's not domesticated. It's actually harvested by people in eastern Nepal, parts of India, and it's coming from wild silk cocoons that were picked off of bushes and trees.
Oh, that's
so
impressive.
And that's the natural color. That's not dye.
Oh.
Then you can bleach it and lighten it, but we like to not bleach things because when you bleach things, you take the character out. You take out some of the aspects of it that actually make it strong and durable and washable. And in like the case of silk, there's a lot of gum content in the silk, which makes it really strong. And so we try to leave as much of that as possible. When we're from the materials to the dyes to the weaving, and then at the end process, when we wash the carpets, we're washing them with soap that we make from a local soap nut. It's like almost looks like a pomegranate. You make an incredibly intense soap that's amazing. It's completely natural. So my aim was to make a product that did not have any processed chemicals in it. So for parts of the line, we're able to do that. This red is a natural dye made with the same substance that you make lac and lacquer out of. And we're also able to transform colors through using bacterial processes, not so different from like making yogurt or beer. And those kind of dyeing techniques are very complex. The recipes are very difficult to rediscover. Sometimes we have to find a really older person to teach us. By the way, this was all natural too. So you see that color is so strong. And so some of the most brilliant colors come from a process that might take days to make the dye, because the dye has to sit and it has to be transformed by the bacteria and become even a more intense color. I just thought I'd throw that in.
Stunning.
I don't know, it's probably 30 feet by 30 feet, but we make carpets like that. And so it's always funny to see them, and if you're on the rooftop looking down and see people.
Wow.
So what are some of the other aspects of this? This is the washing, by the way. We don't use machines. They're actually using paddles. They will completely submerge the rug, and then we're putting this natural soap on that we've made, and then rinsing it all out.
Wow.
So everything in our processes is very small. It's boutique and it's organic as best we can keep it that way. I think the thing about these carpets is that when they're made like this, whether we're making them or making things on that level, the story is in the piece itself. The carpet has a different kind of quality to it that maybe it would not translate in a photograph, but if you're with the actual material, you can feel all of the time and the processing that went into it. So the other thing is that when the carpets come, because they are natural, the colors actually get better with time in many cases. They do mellow a little bit, but I find when I see them, sometimes I'll go back into a job that I made a carpet for 20 years ago, and I'm shocked at how beautiful the carpet looks. I can't even believe that we made it. And I've actually walked in and seen carpets where I felt jealous, and then they were like, "No, it's your carpet." And then I have to tell them, I can't even make stuff like this. But time is also an element, because as the carpet is, because these materials are still retaining all of the properties that they had, they weren't chemically altered. The wool fibers get polished over time. So a wool carpet after 20 years can look like a silk carpet.
Wow.
Yeah, and I've seen carpets that I thought were silk carpets that I made that were wool carpets. They had just been trafficked on. This is also natural dye, the background of this. So there's the aspect of the colors and how the colors affect people in terms of like the physiological effects, the psychological effect, the emotional effect. I've done experiments with making vegetable dye and synthetic dye rugs and hanging them up and seeing that people were attracted to the natural colored carpets 9 out of 10 times without knowing anything about it. In fact, I think that most people on a subliminal level will be attracted to they'll know which thing is actually better for them. So in terms of like, in terms of what I'm doing, I've always thought about actually that aspect of it. How is it going to function, and how is it going to interact with the person who's buying it? And if we could, I would even try to pair a person with the right color and the right. That goes a little bit beyond my skill, but I've often thought about the astrological components of the colors, because they're coming from medicinal plants, and those the organs and systems that those plants are healing are connected, at least in Eastern medicine, with certain ruling planets. So there could be a whole system, an ancient system, and I've often wondered, if one type of person wouldn't be better suited for a color than another. Certainly, like, I find that the colors also could be used in an elemental way, to balance out the house.
Mm.
So, color, I think color and natural color it's a deep ancient science, and the ancient cultures had they had a complete system of it. When I learned to make some of these colors, I realized that we could never discover the recipes by accident. We have discovered many things by trial and error through making mistakes, but some of the most basic processes to make really good color, we had to be shown because the steps to making them were counterintuitive. They're not steps that you would accidentally stumble upon. And that always made me think about how were these colors discovered? Because they're not as simple as taking some plants and throwing them in water and boiling them. They're just, it would take tens of thousands of years to make that many mistakes to discover how to make some of these things. So I find that, that there's a mysterious aspect to it, and maybe that's what always attracted me to carpet making. You could take the whole carpet as a hieroglyph in terms of like the warps and the wefts, time and space, the tying of knots. The knots are almost containing a certain kind of energy when they've been tied. There's like, there have been carpets made in the past where people were making them very intentionally, possibly, we think about prayer rugs, if somebody was praying while they're tying the knots, what's left in the carpet. There's so much about the psychic energy that is passed on from human beings, right? And so when I was doing this, I was really trying to recreate those conditions of that, ancient technology in a modern carpet making. To do that, we had to strip away all of the modern convenience appliances. So we actually, when I started to work, we actually took away a lot of equipment that they had been previously using, and we went back to the most primitive techniques. And so we're trying to make contemporary carpets, but we're trying to actually go deeper into ancient technology to understand what they understood. I mean, environmentally, they were much more careful with their environments than we are in the modern world. They had to live in that environment. They had to create these things without destroying their water, all of the plants, the animals. And so it's always been a question to me is how we can make beautiful, modern, updated things, but be in harmony with that ethos, and also that we're connected like a bloodline. I think of it that we're connected to all these great masters from the past, and we're in a tradition. So we're trying to carry that forward, and it's probably an art that is slowly dying out. You can make carpets by hand, but you don't need to make them by hand. So my personal take is that unless we're putting in all of that intention and all of that work, there's no real need to actually make a handmade carpet if you're not going to do all of that from the beginning with all of the materials. Otherwise you're just using human beings as automatons. And so that's part of what we're doing to keep this alive, basically. Any questions anybody has? I could go on about this forever. But in both cases, I'm the only American client, and I have two different projects which I developed and spent a lot of time with, so they produce for me. They don't sell to other people.
But I mean, do they use the more technologically, quote unquote, advanced machines and things that you threw out for other people?
No, our things are segregated.
Yeah.
No, we don't produce anything for anybody else. I'm saying that
I know.
they may share an office space with another, like, some of these things are arranged by families, so they may have some clients in Europe or in the States. They're not doing anything like our stuff. We have to keep it very separate.
Mhm.
In
That
fact,
takes a lot
if they
of
weren't
work.
separated, what would happen is our work would degenerate pretty quickly. About 20 years ago, my people came to me and said, hey, we can make these carpets faster and you could save some money. And I said, what are you talking about? They said, well, we could simply, they had a new technique that some Americans or Germans brought in about, you know, not actually passing the wefts through the warps properly. And the carpets look almost the same. I mean, they really do look the same. They didn't have the same handle. And I said, no, we're not doing that. And they were like, they were kind of perplexed. They thought this was great. What happened was the whole, all the Tibetan knotting. The Tibetan knot is a complex. It's a complex knot that we have fragments of those carpets that go back, you know, probably 1,500 years. Pieces of them. We know that that kind of knot was used even earlier by like the 5th century BC. They were using that kind of knot. So it's the oldest knot. And they were changing it to make a cheaper, faster carpet. So part of it is preserving, you know, why did these people make a more difficult knot? Did they think it was fun, or did they have a reason for it? And for me, the reason for it was that they were able to, the texture of the rug is different. The rug actually folds more like a blanket. The ones that were cheated, they could have all sorts of problems when you fold them and do things with them. And they also look much, you think that's good, but in a handmade carpet, you don't want, it would be the same as hand-blown glass being perfectly, you know, everything is perfect. So once they started to use that simplified system, it spread throughout the industry because it was a commercial pressure, and there's only a few that I know of that are still making the original knot, and we're one of them. I actually don't know who else is doing it. I've known people who said that their productions got contaminated by that technique and they could not go back. They were not able to, even if they wanted to, they would have to fire everybody and start over. So it's interesting.
That's
So
a
I mean,
horrible
for me,
idea.
we're making these modern carpets. We're using all this technology, but it's also we're preserving a kind of a heritage. And you know, I don't usually talk to clients about it because they get bored. They're not that interested. But they respond to them. They don't know why. They just say, I don't know why, but yours have a thing that I'm really attracted to. And I say, you know, that's great. I don't need to explain it to them if they're feeling it.
It's like being in a classically proportioned room,
Something like
as
that.
opposed to something
It's about
built
the
in the
vibes, right?
70s, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Speak a little more about some of the alternate threads you touched on in past samples out of like mohair and alpaca and things that we may not have been exposed to from other manufacturers, and how that compares to the more traditional like wool and silk in terms of performance, longevity,
Right.
color, price point, all the things.
So yeah, if it's not spun correctly, it will pill. So some producers would have problems with that. If it's spun really nice and tight, you can get it almost like the textile, and it is super strong, and it'll last a really long time. And it's got a really nice sheen on it that's not as glossy as silk. So it's not glam, but I'd say it's very good. It's almost got like a very classic 30s kind of, you know, deco-y look. Material's really nice. I like to mix the materials too. Like I like to put sometimes 1 ply of the wild nettle, which is a little more stiff, but does not take the dye in a uniform way. And I'll put it with a ply of mohair and a ply of wool, and the material will have this incredible stippled effect and beautiful brushed variation. Some of the other materials, alpaca we're using right now just feels really good. And it is expensive. Pashmina or cashmere we use, but I don't use it that much because I actually think the wool we use is actually better. Our wool's coming from the Himalayas, from Tibet, and we're hand processing it. And that wool, when you spin it, when we get really fine wool, I'd say it's, I'm not talking about standard knot count, but when we spin it fine and we do like a very fine knot count, it's even better than cashmere. It's certainly less processed. And silk you have to be careful with because what's called silk is not always silk, or it's not pure silk. We found that by dyeing silk, sometimes we would buy lots of silk, this was like 20 years ago, and we couldn't get the same color. And it was because the silk was different. So we did chemical analysis and we find that there were a lot of impurities in some of them. I think wool is amazing, but I think that for the kind of work we do, I like to put a little bit of silk in with the wool because we're working at a level where sometimes you do need a little bit of that sheen. It really depends on the level of the furniture, the artwork, and the architecture. Certain things are, I tend to think of certain materials to use in a more casual setting, and then others are required for a more formal or glamorous or whatever that's calling for. That's how I kind of think about the materials. I love that nettle because it'll get softer over time, and it's just like, it's such beautiful material, and you can dye it, you can design with it, but it's just beautiful when you see a big piece with nothing in it but the material. It's really great. We mix that sometimes with wool and silk and things like that. Other materials we use kind of like a cactus or aloe fiber, which is really nice, and the natural color is really beautiful, like a kind of light brown mocha color.
What is the texture of that?
It's a plant fiber. We're using it in flat weaves, but it looks it's not expensive and it looks really chic. And it's like you could just do a wall to wall in a room with it and then put a carpet on top of that. So we're always experimenting with fibers that we can get in a raw form, with the exception of silk. But the silk too, we use high grade textile silk from China. We also use silk that is raw silk, sometimes from India. That is, we use a bit of that. And then anybody else?
You mentioned that there were some dyes that are made in a process that was similar to like a fermentation process. What colors do those achieve?
So indigo traditionally was made in a fermentation process, but about 200 or 300 years ago, it was discovered how to dissolve. Indigo will not dissolve in water, so it was discovered how to dissolve it artificially with certain acids. And that's a totally legitimate way to dye with indigo, but the best way to dye with indigo is it takes days. You ferment it with a starter like you would use for sourdough bread, and those starters were passed on, so the older they are, the more powerful they are. So some people would have a starter that might have gone back a couple hundred years.
Wow.
And then the dye would be put in a vat in the ground. It has to be kept at a very stable temperature. It cannot fluctuate too much. It's very sensitive. The indigo then is dissolved by the bacteria, and that blue has a different quality than the one that's dissolved quicker.
Okay.
And it often has a different kind of sparkle when you weave a carpet with it. Some of that blue. Indigo is one of the most incredible colors because for me, when you do it really well, it's like it can almost hypnotize you looking at that color. You just weave an indigo carpet and you just so when the color's really good, there's a quality about it, and sometimes it has overtones in it. So you'll see them with overtones of green and red.
Wow.
You're looking at the indigo, but you're also picking up like a whole bands of frequency.
Right. Yeah.
I have an indigo carpet in my showroom downtown right now that is beautiful blue, but you can actually see zones where the color's like fluctuating and getting a little bit of teal in it. Sometimes you could get a little purple in it in places.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, the other color that we also do certain reds with fermentation process. You can make great purples and pinks and
Wow.
hot orange, and you can make colors that don't look natural. They look synthetic because they're so powerful.
Wow.
That's what I was into. Like, how do you do that? Because
Yeah.
we know how to make the ABC dyes, you know.
Right.
But if you go to the Metropolitan Museum and look at a 16th century carpet with brilliant color,
Yeah.
that's what we've been on that path.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really enriches them through the fermentation process.
Yeah, and think about this, that the color at that time, you go hundreds of years ago, the color would have been their technology. That would have been like the Rolls Royce, like, I have a purple silk.
Yeah.
There was also status with color.
Yes.
But it represented, the colors were expensive. And they still are, like are made with the rarest things, and they are the most expensive.
Wow.
And I've made colors where my people said to me, please, Joe, don't make that color again. Why not? They're like, cost $1,000 to dye for a small rug.
Oh, wow.
I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what it takes.
Yeah, I mean, $1,000 in Nepal 20 years ago was like a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I would just say, don't worry about it. The clients will pay for it.
So you would have a rug design, and if it came in color A,
Yeah.
it would be, $20,000.
I had to average
And if
them
it
out.
came in color B, it would be like $10,000?
I was making some colors that the dye would cost like well over $1,000. Aside from the weaving and all the other stuff, it was just, and that was like a lot for them when the dye might cost $50.
Right.
Yeah.
So and the material was hard to get, and and they had to use an incredible amount, so they felt it was like wasteful. Like, we were making a black color that was an aubergine
Wow.
with like a lot of purple in it, and we were making it from a really